Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vivid Earth. Today, I've got a special guest back with me for the first time in 2026. Um, Kenneth Scott, the founder of Pantera Vida and the Gemstone University, avid student and researcher of law and legal and law systems around the world, and also very involved with some of the financial systems and things happening in the background. Fascinating information, all about sovereignty, being free, living as a free man and woman in the private. So Scott is Kenneth is extremely knowledgeable, and I'm thrilled to have him back. And we're going to kind of pick up on what we left off from last time and jump into a few new subjects as well, because so much has happened in the world since we last spoke. Ken, wow, it's like feel like things are moving fast now, and the consciousness of the planet is expanding at the same time as well. What are your thoughts on where we are at the beginning of 2026 right now?
Hmm. Well, I think where we're at is a juxtaposition of two realities that have been superimposed in this reality, in this holographic containment field that we're in. Can't really call it a planet anymore. It is a plane of existence. It is a planet. It's a dimensional context or construct. But it is basically a holographic containment field. So everything that you mentioned, law, monetary systems, our current events, technology, and so forth, are all part of that construct, that containment field. But reality is mutable and reality is not fixed. We were just talking about structure and rigidity before we started recording. Most people are inclined to want to be structured and relatively rigid because that gives them a sense of security, and they know they can wake up the next day and go to work, come home, do the chores and whatever home things are, do whatever they do. But essentially, even those who think they are rebelling against structure and rigidity might be surprised if they really looked at themselves or the system structure that they're in objectively, and would see that, no, in fact, they are relatively structured, relatively rigid, even in their protest or their rebellious state. It's just a counterpoint to the rigidity. It's just another reflection of the same structure and rigidity, just the obverse of it. Reality is in the eyes of the beholder. So what you see as reality is what reality is. Doesn't mean that's reality. And there's a general mass consensus hallucination that we all accept, or not all, but most accept, as this is the way it is. This is physical reality, this is law or legal reality, this is financial reality, and so forth. And I have to find my niche in order to survive in that reality. But as we're entering this new year of the Romans, this is the year that they call 2026. So I've recently adopted the habit of saying, well, today is July 20th, 2026, according to the Romans, because that's simply a chronological, calendrical construct that we've all agreed on, you know. And there's been many calendars that some are aware of, the Mayan calendar and this and that calendar. A calendar is simply a construct to take a daily occurrence and put it into an annualized system and then put that into other larger time frames. But it's all basically linear constructs of what we call time, and where we find ourselves on that linear path of time in what we call space. You're in South Africa, defined by the Romans as a country called South Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So back to your question, where are we at in the beginning of this Roman year, 2026? I personally experience and see quite clearly that we are finally at the point of significant and serious bifurcation of those multiple realities we're in. So bifurcation, by definition, the syllable bi means two, and so bifurcation or forking would mean there's two realities. But of course, there's thousands and millions maybe even billions of sub-realities in those two primary ones. And so everybody is creating a reality and making choices, or better stated, fulfilling choices. Because from my point of view, we all made choices quite a long time ago. Doesn't mean that we're absolutely bound to it, but primarily or fundamentally, we made a choice a long time ago. Am I going to go into the, the mass consensus construct that clearly, in a mass structured way, the world and the population is being led to choose that path? Or am I going to truly take the path of self-directed, what we call freedom, what now in Pantera we have coined the phrase freedom absolute, and which means basically freedom at every level of our being and existence, not just legal freedom, not just monetary, financial freedom, but true inner freedom at every level of our being. So if we're a creator being, and the many things that we have made choices about in this life construct, or what we call past, previous lives, has an impact on what we're doing now, and has informed and influenced the primary choice of which way, which path we're going. So, as you know, Anita, we as Pantera, myself individually, have chosen the path of freedom, true freedom at every level. I'm quite sure that you've chosen that path as well. I'm quite sure many of your viewers have chosen that path. So what we're really here to talk about, beginning of this new Roman year, is what does it look like in terms of what I use the phrase substantiating those choices. So what does the word substantiate mean? What is the root word of substance? Because when we talk about in law the form of equity, there's a basic fundamental phrase in equity, which is form versus substance. So we could say that the regular matrix system is built on, relies on, and compels performance in form. We all know that we have to fill out forms. We want to have a bank account to use their money system. We got to fill out forms. Now the amount of forms is increasing almost exponentially. It's not just you go to the bank, you give them an ID and a number, and they open an account. Now they want to do a proctology exam, look up your ass, and know everything about you, literally. What did you eat last night? Let's see how it's digesting in you. You know, what kind of supplements are you taking, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Each one is a form. And so we're being informed into a rigidity of structure that's becoming more and more limited and limiting than it's ever been, and growing that way quite exponentially. And there's no equity in it. You have no equity in their form. You occupy a legal construct. You are a legal, or what's called a juristic person. You have juridical personality. Juridical simply means of juris, but of their legal jurisdiction. And that will define you across the board. And you have no equity in that position. You only have limited beneficial use of the things that you think you own, whether it's your home, your children, your clothes, your body, and so forth. Counterposed to that, or juxtapose, is substance. Equity is about substance. Our being is about substance. When we come into this material reality and take on this incarnate form, we're here to create, and the creation comes from inside of us to substantiate a reality and create it according to our will and our purpose and our intent in what we intend and direct by our will to create. So that's substance. And ultimately, the real substance is the substance of our being. So right now in the beginning of this year, what I see is that bifurcation, that separation of two realities is accelerating. And the choice that each individual being has to make now is, are you going to substantiate from the substance of your being who you are in which of those realities versus are you going to just accommodate for the ease of survival or out of fear or whatever to go into more and more form that's devoid of the substance of who you really are.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very good subject to dive into now. We are indeed at a bifurcation right now. The rift between the two seems to be drifting further and further apart. It's getting more pronounced. As you say, there are a lot of sub little uh, timelines that people are choosing, but there seems to be two main ones that are kind of uh, converging together, all the individual little timelines, so to speak, that fit with that channel of existence. So where are we? We seems to, that we seem it's a challenging time because we're still in this 3D construct. We're still sharing space and time with people that think very differently, perhaps, than we are. They've chosen perhaps whether consciously or unconsciously, a lower timeline, a more restrictive timeline in which a timeline driven by materialism, greed, structure, competition. Whereas many of us have chosen, as you said, freedom, sovereignty, but also, love, compassion, and peace and harmony for all. But those two realities are still sort of coexisting at this point. So how do you see 2026 sort of play out in terms of, are we going to see, from your point of view, those two realities drift further apart, in which we will perhaps get some relief from not having to share so much space with those that are really not on the timeline that we are on anymore. I shall be kind with my words there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a lot of people that seem to have gone insane right now as well. They just have lost their minds, and it's just a crazy period all around. I just tell people to stay calm and, stay out of the way, so to speak, because you don't want to be pulled into, debates and arguments and situations that are
Yeah,
just not
yeah,
going anywhere right now. Just stay in your
yeah,
lane and focus on the timeline and the
yeah.
and the path that you've chosen.
That's a very good point, and really the most important one. Stay in your lane. Well, what is your lane? Well, you have to define where you are going. You know, if your definition of where you're going is I'm steadily taking step by step towards what I want to be in this reality. What do I want to be? I want to be free. I want to truly have real freedom. And you've used the word sovereignty a couple of times. And as you know, I've been involved with the law movement, what people still call the sovereignty movement. So it's had various, keywords: law movement, freedom movement, sovereignty movement, and that's, pretty much it. Um, I never soon into it. I've been involved in it since 1990, 91. So much longer than almost all people who are out there promoting their concepts of law and sovereignty and things like that. So I have the vantage point of having actually lived through in real time every call it era or epoch of the process of all of that over the last 35 years. And so in the 1990s, sovereignty was the key word. I want to be sovereign. But nobody really understood what that really meant. And of course, in the system, which it always does, it takes anything that emerges that has substance to it. It has some sense of enlivening, energy to it, and they will grab it and they'll convert it to a lifeless form. So they took that energy that was coming up in the 90s, based on the work of people from the 60s through the 90s, even a few going way back further, but mainly the 70s and 80s. And the people that I studied with and I hung out with during the 90s that had been my mentors and the people who were ahead of me in the curve of learning and research. So they came out of the 80s and they stood on the shoulders of the people who were there in the 60s and 70s and still into the 80s. Um, and So the catchphrase, the catchword was always sovereignty. Okay, I want to be sovereign. And once I got into the 2000s, the 2010s, and I started shifting my focus from commerce and this concept of sovereignty, and I started really going deep into what equity really is, then I came to understand that that is a false lead, that term sovereignty. And as I was saying, how did the system grab that and turn it into a lifeless form? They called it sovereign citizens. And they were actually correct. And they had a legal basis to say everybody who's attempting to be a sovereign is just a sovereign citizen. And why is that? Because they still were attached to the juristic person. Everybody talks about the straw man, the birth certificate, all of that. It creates a fiction in law, a legal entity, which in their Latin legal term is an ens, E-N-S, legis, L-E-G-I-S, or legal entity. And that's what a juristic person is. And that's what essentially a person that's created by the state that you have contracted with to operate within their domestic commercial zone. They've created it, they've made the rules around it. And until you are truly and completely severed and attached to it, disengaged from it, you are still a citizen. And a citizen ultimately is property of the state. So that applies to the United States and in your country and Commonwealth countries. But then you have an additional tag on you, which is called a subject of the crown. Okay. So whether you're a citizen or a subject, either way, the word subject is, etymologically related to the word subjugation. You, by definition, are subjugated under a hierarchy of authority and power. As a citizen in the United States and other countries, you are operating in the commercial zone by contract and agreement as a commercial entity under their legal fiction. And therefore, you are bound to all the rules of that. And the primary rules of all of that are the monetary rules of how debt is created, how the suretyship or guarantee position of that debt, and all of that, and the bonding of that surety or guarantee to fulfill the performance of the debts that you have agreed to, then basically you're attached to the form. You are not sovereign. You can't be sovereign until you do the steps to completely disengage. And in law, there's always a remedy. So the remedy exists to do that disengagement, but very few people really actually do it correctly. And there's a lot of people out there chasing or signing on to people that are promoting large scale groups and all these positions worldwide in the different countries and saying that, just come here, do these few steps and your status corrected. Now you're a sovereign and all of that. But it's just not true. And it doesn't matter what you think. If you have to, or if you're pulled into any sort of legal or monetary compulsion, like paying taxes or doing this or doing that, let's see how far you get in terms of saying, well, I'm a sovereign or I'm status corrected. So they say, well, you may think you're sovereign, but you're a sovereign citizen, which basically means the same thing as you're wearing a shirt and you have a green shirt. Sovereign just describes the color of the shirt. The shirt is what is the physical reality. Sovereign citizen is the reality. You're property of the state, you're
You're still
bonded.
a citizen. You're still an employee of the
Yeah.
state.
So you've colored your citizenship with this moniker and this superficial surface paint of sovereign. And that's not where you want to be. So when I started moving into equity in the year 2011, 12, so 14, 15 years ago, it became very clear that the real essence of freedom relative to the legal and the monetary system is the word solvent. Solvent means you have that you're not underwater, you're not under bonded or obligatory obligations. That's redundant, obligatory contracts to perform something that put you into a certain box of status and so forth. And what does that mean to be solvent? It means to be free of bondage. It means to be not bankrupt. It means to be essentially you're not in debt. And for as long as you're utilizing third person, that ends legis juristic person to operate in commerce, and you, excuse me, using that person in commerce to do the things that almost everybody does every day, you are bonded to a vast level of monetized debt that's visible on the public side, but also a vast amount, even multiples of what's visible on the public side, of bonds and bondage on the private side that numbers in the thousands and thousands. And now I'm not saying in dollar terms or rand or peso terms, thousands and thousands. I'm talking about each individual contract. So there are thousands and thousands of contracts. By the time you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s, we've all created thousands of contracts that we're bonded to that make us deeply in debt, a bondage servant of the debt system, and a bankrupt. And therefore, you're not solvent. And it's just plain and simple. Unless you do a process to fully disengage from all that bonding, what's the word? Bond. What's the root of that bond is of a larger context? It's called bondage, you know. So freedom absolute at the legal level is freedom from bondage. It is being solvent. Who cares if you're a sovereign? Do you have your own body politic and nation state or country that you're the sovereign of? That's an archaic term. That's the term of the kings and the priests and the churches and the temples and all of that. Who's the sovereign? That's not what I want to be. I mean, I want to be free and free absolute at all levels of attachment, bonding, and engagement or entanglement. But I don't need to be sovereign. But I do intend by my will, my directive principle, to be able to be in the world or be in the matrix, more precisely stated, but not of it. How do you be in it and not of it? Just like the movie told us, the Matrix movie. You have an avatar, but we can actually have multiple avatars that we create and or project into the matrix, and it does what we need it to do, those avatars in the matrix, but we're not attached to it. And that's real status correction. And that's what nobody is really doing out there who are promoting, a few pieces of paper and saying, just sign here and you're status corrected, sign here and you're a sovereign, and sign here and, you're in the new reality. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's a very
Yeah.
important point. There are some people that says, they've just spiritually freed themselves and declared all contracts, cords, bonds, and hooks null and void, and it's no longer valid, and there's nothing more they need to do to declare their freedom.
Right. And that's what those few pieces of paper do. I declare that they're all null and void, but that's not how contract law works, even on a universal sense. If you are going to settle and truly be disengaged from a contract, you have to abide by the agreements and the terms of the contract that you entered into. You can't just declare, it's like, okay, I bought a car and then I got some financing on it and I owe the bank or the whatever the service debt service institution, I owe them $20,000. Well, I don't like that because $20,000 in Federal Reserve notes, that's a lot of bondage and I'm in debt and all the rest. So I just gonna go in the corner, I'm gonna wave a piece of paper in front of the office of where I send my payments and say, I declare this contract is null and void. See how long that stands. No, you have to settle that obligation, the terms and conditions of the contract you voluntarily signed and received consideration for. They gave you a card to use, but you signed a contract to service their monetized debt account. And so you have to settle it, knowing how to settle it, but in a way that's different than just having money in the bank and keep sending checks, is what real, for one thing, it's equitable, it's honorable. And if we're going to say that we're living beings standing in honor, my word is my bond, and things like that, then we have to be honorable in terms of the agreements and the equity that we have entered into.
Even
And
if they've already been paid 100 times, you still have to be honorable
yeah, because
and
you,
starve your
yeah,
children to be able to pay that debt when they've already been paid 100 times for it.
yeah, but there's ways to do that that aren't on the public side. And that's what the deep education that I've immersed myself in for 35 years, and I've winnowed through or weeded out the chaff from the wheat so that the real wheat, what did we classically call wheat? It's called the staff of life. Or what's the staff of life? It's the substance of my being. It's the same thing. It's just different words, different metaphors. So if you're going to separate the wheat from the chaff, separate your substance of being from the chaff of the fictional lifeless form, then you have to complete those contracts. There's, when you study equity, your beginning study point is the primary 20 maxims of equity. One of those maxims says if you want to receive equity, you must do equity. So what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that bring up in your thought?
Well, I think as a universal principle, yes, that's important. If you want to be treated with honor and respect, you've got to act in honor and respect. And if you have willingly signed a contract, you have to kind of honor that contract in a way. So I do understand that. And as you said as well, there's other ways and means that doesn't necessarily require you writing a check to them to
Hmm.
settle that debt in a way
Right.
that's
Yeah.
equitable and honorable.
So as you described it, that's the principle behind that maxim. But in operation, in the monetary system that we're in, it basically means you can't just declare the contract null and void because it's illegal or whatever. Because in the system you agreed to be in by contract and performance and behavior every single day for decades, since we were whatever age we got our first got a social security number, and or got our first bank checking account or whatever. We've signed contracts to be in the system, and we can't just walk away from it, but we can settle and close it, and then we can walk away from it. So in every contract, there is, by law of contracts, mutual consideration. If I want to buy your car and I've got $5,000, I give you the dollars, you give me the car, it's clean and it's done. But if I bonded myself to a performance contract, like making monthly payments with interest for so many months and years, then it's not done until the contract's done. You can't just declare it null and void because in that system that you're in, there is equity on both sides. And yes, we can say, well, it's not fair because if I pay my mortgage for 29 years of a 30-year mortgage contract and then I can't pay it for the last 10 payments, they can come in and take the whole house and I have no equity. But that's in that system. Okay. So how do you do equity while you're still entangled in that system, but are in the process of moving out of the system? That's the real key. So when the maxim says, in order to receive equity, I want the equity I put into this car, you must do equity, which means you still have to honor the terms of the contract that you entered into. You may say it's not fair, they didn't tell me everything, blah, 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 but that's fine. In some sort of cosmic sense, that's true. But in terms of the reality we're in their domestic, commercial, monetary system, that's not going to hold water at the bank. The bank's just going to say, yep, you defaulted. They get the house, send the sheriff, get you out and take the house. But
So
there are
you've got to play
ways.
their game to get out of the game. So play the
Well,
game on their
yes,
terms and
yes and
then
no.
exit
Well,
the game.
you have to honor their terms, but or their game and the terms within the game. But there are other terms that, first of all, almost everybody who's a call it an agent Smith or an operative in their game, the bank teller, the bank officer, the loan officer, the repo man, the judge, the clerk at the court, level and degree, they don't know the rules higher up or behind the screen of that they look at every day. That's their reality. They're programmed in the form of their reality, and all they know is the rules that are in that construct or that closed system. So yes, you have to play by those rules, but there are other rules that do inform and control the rural construct or the closed system that they're in. So that's where education comes in. You have to know what that is. And you don't learn it overnight. You don't learn it by somebody saying, just sign these pieces of paper and then you're free and you're a sovereign. It just really doesn't work that way. And that's why that's why I was totally compelled as I went through the 90s and the 2000s and spent 20 years hanging out with a lot of people seeking freedom and truth and sovereignty. But I saw every single time that people did not have uh, a, a, a place where there was continuity, that they could wake up every single day and know that there was something that was stable, that was solid, that they could go to learn the incremental steps to really have the power of um, their own will and their own life. And so that's why we created Pantera 24 years ago to create that environment. And we've been through 24 years of a lot of shit and a lot of hell, of a lot of people who've come in saying, well, I want to be free. Okay, fine. Here, study, study, study for the next 5 years. Well, screw that. I just want you to give me a piece of paper I can sign. I said, well, if that's what you want, you can get that down the street. That's not what you're getting here. What you're getting here is real substance that you're going to learn and integrate and actually be able to build your capacity. And it's a very powerful transformational process. I've been through it for 3 decades, and I've watched a lot of people over the last 15 to 20 years go through it too. The ones who stay the course and really apply themselves, when they get at least reasonably through it and starting to be on the other side of it, they just go, it's just like Neo waking up, seeing the code of the Matrix. I said, wow, I thought I knew what I was talking about, but I see that I didn't. And it's quite, um, you know, extraordinary to watch people go through that process. But the majority who've come into Pantera don't go through the process. They don't want to stay and do the hard work.
Yeah, indeed. Um, I think we touched on this last time. I can't remember. There's a lot of people that believe that USA Inc. has already been dissolved, and there's a republic waiting in the background for the right moment
Mhm.
to present that to the public as the original republic. At which point, I guess all citizenship of the foreign corporate entity masquerading as a government should uh, cease to exist. So people may ask, well, is it even worth putting in all the work now to study all of this, to do the status correction when, that entity is going to be publicly uh, removed at any moment? And not just the
Mhm.
US, but around the world similarly.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to what we just talked about, which is in order to receive equity, you must do equity. Okay. So I'm in the United States. That's where my US person originated. It's what I operated with from the age of 15 when I first signed up for a social security number and a checking account, started getting paid by an employer, and then went off. Had a couple of jobs. I'm not a job type being. So by the time I was 20, I never had a job again. I'm a proud founder of the club called the Terminally Unemployable. Um, and so,
It's a great club. I love it.
yeah, so I was, I've been in business for over 50 years. And, uh, but essentially, I was in the other club, the body politic that was bound by all the contracts and everything else that we've talked about to that United States corporate entity and all of the things about it, all of the way that it created its monetary issue as monetized debt, assured by bonded surety guarantors to bankrupt franchises, which were the entity called my person, my name, that I could operate in commerce. I was bound to that. Everybody who is in the United States Inc., through those persons, through that construct, is bound to it. You are the same in the construct that's called South Africa or the Republic or whatever they like to.
South Africa Inc.
So yeah, well,
RSA Inc. RSA
yeah,
Inc.
and basically they're all, what was, initiated, pioneered, and then basically exported to all the nation states around the world, which is called a municipal corporation. So the United States went through it first, and they had to have, because of the design, the overall design of the three city states, Vatican, City of London, DC, how the whole thing was constructed over thousands and multiple reset cycles of time. We can get into that, which is one subject I do want to talk about, is where
Mm.
we're at, not just about 2026, but where are we at relative to the end
In
of
the
the
reset
world.
cycle.
Yeah, which is really the end of this current cycle that is a loop that's going to be collapsed. So that's the program, that's the script, and then then do a mass mind wipe and do a reset, and then we come back.
Except it's not going to happen this time.
Exactly. Well, that's the point. So it's very important to understand the historical context of that and where we're at. So my point in bringing that up before we go fully into that is just to talk about the United States and the three city states, the triregnum, the triple crown, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it was always not just pre-planned or pre-programmed. It was hardwired into the script because it's the script that is followed every time. The political script, the legal and monetary script, the religious script, it's the same script. That's why it feels so familiar. Been there, done that. Now they're trying to do it again. So much of the world's uniform structures were initiated, pioneered, essentially perfected in the United States and then exported to all the other nation states, each one of which, except for a few, became also bankrupt nation states. Um, so um, so, but we're part of the body politic that's attached as the collective whole that guarantees those monetary issues. Those are contracts. And there's a master contract. The United States, it said, well, they're $38 trillion in debt. Well, who are they in debt to? The banks, et cetera, a little bit to the people, but mostly to the other side of their own creation. They're in debt to themselves. But the debt structure was and is used to collapse the system, do their World Economic Forum version of the reset and all of that. But the key point is what we just talked about. In order to receive equity, you must do equity. So if we want to receive the equity of everything, we, the people who did the hard labor of building the houses and the bridges and the roads and the structures of the physical reality and our individual equity and all that, if we want to receive that equity, we must do equity. What does that mean? It's the same thing as an individual who does status correction. They must settle the obligations of those contracts. So that's really the key that nobody out there is saying, oh, it's a jubilee and we're all going to be free and we're going to wake up tomorrow or some tomorrow and they're going to be all signed off. And we're all going to be out of debt. But there's billions, trillions, quadrillions, maybe even quintillions of units of obligation that we call money or dollars to the system that has to be either paid, which is impossible, and that's how it was first constructed. Okay, you can't pay the debt, so we'll do something else. We'll forgive the debt, but you have to sign this new contract that says you're bonded. We'll feed you, we'll house you, we'll give you a job, but you will never be free because now we own you forever. We've collected on the liquidated damages of the bankrupt system, and you're the collateral. So now, if you want to eat and drink, you have to sign this new contract. Well, that's
Isn't
not
that
what.
what these private global trusts are about?
Okay,
The
well, hold that question. Let me just finish that. But that's where they wanted it to go. That's not what's happening. If you really
Mhm.
look and see the real
That was
soup.
what the reset, the new world
Right.
order
Yeah.
reset
Well,
was going
that's
to be
what,
about.
the Klaus Schwab, classic
The
sentence, you'll own
weapons.
nothing, you'll be happy. Because you'll never have to struggle, for a job or whatever. You'll get universal basic income, but you will be completely hardwired to our digital system, digital ID, digital currency. You'll be in a 15-minute city. You'll be,
You'll own nothing, but apparently be happy.
yeah. And if that's all you want in life is to wake up every day to play with your electronic toys and walk the dog around the block and then come back to your box and watch more whatever on the electronic screen. And if that's what makes you happy, that's fine. You'll be happy. But those who have substance of being would never be happy as creator beings to do that. Um, so, but we have to do equity in order to receive equity. What's doing equity? It means properly settling, extinguishing, closing, and resolving all obligations of contract. It's as simple as that. So, does anybody out there who is talking every day on Rumble and YouTube and other channels and Telegram who are saying, it's all done, it's going to be happening, and you'll wake up tomorrow, Jubilee, you're all free, no debt, all this money, you can have all this money dispersed through all these programs and, currency exchanges and blah, blah, blah. But what's going to happen to all those billions, trillions, and quadrillions of documented obligations that circulate through the whole system, that if they were all pulled in one instant, everything would collapse? And that's what the deep state wants. That's what they designed the whole thing, is to collapse everything precipitously, have a bunch of millions of people die from starvation or whatever, and force people to go sign up for their program, their new contract. So what has been happening for decades, really, and accelerating over the last 10 years, and really at a exponential parabolic curve where we're going straight up, time is collapsing in the curve. Something has to be in place to settle and close all of those contractual obligations and concurrently issue a new form of circulating medium, which is what currency is. It flows like the current of a river. It's a circulating medium for continuing exchange for the things that people need: food, medicine, and so forth. And that money, most people think that there's this great reset, currency reset, global currency reset, reanimation of the republic. Because there's dinar intels out there that promote the phrase, a new republic. Which way is it? New republic through a GCR, or GCR for a new republic, one or the other. But they don't know what the
Restored
internal.
republic. Yeah.
Yeah, or a re-inhabited republic. But they don't know how that's really going to work. How is there going to be money in the bank that you go and it's not Federal Reserve note debt money anymore? It's just new money, and then all the debts are forgiven. You have to settle the past equitable system. And people will say, well, it's not equitable. They cheated. Well, yeah, they did, but there's still reciprocal equities and have to be settled. In other words, accounts have to be closed in order for us to receive the equity that in turn is remonetized in a solvent system, not a bankrupt monetized debt system. So those contracts have to be settled, and the new system has to be emerge. So what you see going on right now with the silver market and things like that is basically a controlled collapse, because the plan was, the cabal plan was not a controlled collapse. It was a precipitous, cataclysmic collapse that would leave everybody dazed and confused and absolutely bereft of any option other than to sign the new contract. That's what the old plan was. What we see happening now and has been happening for years is a controlled collapse, so that the old system is imploding and collapsing on itself, but new things are already in place that are being amped up, so to speak, so that there won't be a precipitous collapse.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Very, very interesting. And in terms of settling that debt, I mean, we're seeing now silver doing extraordinary things and all the naked shorts being exposed right now. The banks are no longer going to be able to shuffle pieces of paper anymore. And they in a very serious situation right now. So could it be also that, silver will collapse the fiat dollar, then all that debt will be able to be settled at a very much lower price, because all those global trusts, uh, whether it's Sukarno or, the uh, whether it's, a Monte Cristo trust or all these different trusts that have been set up globally for centuries, some of them, that then that debt will be able to easily be settled, because the fiat dollar will be kind of worth nothing, and then the new federal dollar backed by
Mm-hmm.
gold will kind of replace it.
Yeah, well, let's just use a basic example. Um, so you and I have been doing business back and forth for quite a long time, and we just keep accounts. We don't necessarily exchange monetary units, because every month you owe me some money and I owe you some money, and we just settle at the end of the month or the end of the quarter or the end of the year. And the way we do it is we just take our audited accounts, and at the end of the year, so we don't exchange money, we exchange goods, Maybe you're manufacturing something and I have the raw material. So I give you the raw material. I'm able to maintain my exploitation of a mine or a forest or an agricultural, farm, and I can give you the raw material, whatever that is. Maybe I give you milk and you make cheese, whatever. Okay. And I have my ability to maintain my operations, and you have your ability to do the same without us exchanging dollars every month. Um, Hang on one second. But at the end of the year, we want to settle the accounts, you know. So we look at it, and at the end of the year, you owe me $500,000, but I owe you $700,000. So what do we do to settle it? We do an offset. We take the $500,000 you owe me against the 700 I owe you, and we reduce it. Now the net that's out of balance is I owe you $200,000, so I have to pay that to you. That settles the account. Okay, so then we start over. We do the same thing the next year. But what if talking about the global system? Okay, so all the people of the world and all the companies and so forth owe, you know, $5 quadrillion in debt to the banks and the central banks and the system. But what if there was a mechanism where that those central banks and the current system was actually so bankrupt with all the paper that they issued that they're obligated to settle? Okay, so remember, when there's a central bank of issue called a Federal Reserve Bank or Central Bank of South Africa or any other country, that entity is called a central bank of issue. It issues the currency, but it issues it against bonds from the treasury of the nation state. So the treasury issues its debt, exchanges it for the Federal Reserve debt, and then circulates that FRN debt into the system, and people use it to quote unquote buy and sell. On a world scale, they've been issuing derivative paper that has no substance at all. There's nothing backing it. So all these short contracts, what people call naked shorts, and what's a naked short? It means that you're shorting the market. You're betting that the market will go down in the nominal system that says silver is worth $50 an ounce or whatever. And you're saying, no, it'll go short, it'll go down. And it'll go down enough to hit my bottom of the contract so that I can basically steal the money, because I never had silver to back up my contract, but I'm going to steal the money from those who went long because I've forced it down and they're going to end up having to sell. I can buy at a lower level, fulfill my contracts, and then settle it out. But then we're
They've been
talking,
suppressing the price of silver for
well,
a very long time.
they've been artificially controlling it because it's not a
Yeah.
real market, and if you've followed all the information that's coming out now in YouTube and elsewhere, in Telegram, that, what's the actual annual production of silver from the mines that produce it every year? And then what's the annual consumption of silver for all of the technology, for the
Yeah.
computers and the cars and the solar panels and blah, 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 and all the rest of that? It doesn't meet, the production, the supply does not meet the actual demand, much less meeting the demand for a monetary base, whether it's at the banking level or whether it's an individual who wants to buy silver and stash it, waiting for it to go up. So the price has been artificially reduced, but that's just silver. What about all the other derivatives? They take the mortgages against houses.
Yeah.
Well, we're living right now in California. It's the biggest balloon of so-called real estate value on the planet, basically. And they say that California is like the fifth largest, used to be the fourth or third even largest economy in the world. Now I think it's more like seventh or eighth. But how is that actually calculated? Well, a big part of it is the real estate that they pump up and up. And so what costs you $1 million in California only costs you 200,000 in Kentucky. Okay. And then you got the taxes and everything else. But then they have these artificially inflated real estate values. They combine them in something called a certified mortgage obligation, which is taking 1,000 mortgages and packaging them into one unit. They call it a certified mortgage obligation. That's a derivative. They've derived something that's relatively real because you have 1,000 mortgagees who are obligated to pay the monthly mortgage payment. And as long as they keep paying it, everything's hunky dory. So then that monthly debt servicing maintains those 1,000 mortgages. Then they can take that 1,000 mortgage package and they use it in the banking system to do their funny money. They do all these off-book trading and things like that. They created all this off-book money for the last 70, 80 years and use that to build our prison. They built all the underground bases and the tunnels and the secret programs and black ops and everything off of these off-book accounts that they worked off of by trading derivatives. And so what if all of those come to roost? That they can't keep turning it over and over because their original plan was to collapse everything, call it a liquidated bankruptcy, go after the liquidated damages, which is the people, persons, and property that was collateralized through all the bankruptcy of every bankrupt nation state, and claim those as damages. That was the plan. Build it to this vast bubble of a Ponzi scheme that could never be settled, force the system into insolvency, collapse it. And insolvency in that sense is inability to do your monthly debt service. So they never planned to pay off their debts. But now what's happening is they're being forced to. That's the collapse, but that's the controlled collapse. So back to the basic offset example between you and I doing business, settling our books at the end of the year. What if all those quadrillions of derivatives, paper value, and all of those short contracts in the silver market and all kinds of other markets, they get forced to have to comply with the rules of that system and they have to meet those obligations. That's what's just happened in the silver market, that there was a break point around $68 per ounce that if it went above, those short contracts were called. That was a margin call. They didn't have the spread to maintain it. So they tried to force it down in December. It didn't happen. Now it's all the way up to 100 an ounce, and they're liquidating those contracts in those banks. That's the controlled collapse. The next cycle will be all the other derivatives, the mortgage derivatives, and all the rest of it. So that whole system is basically imploding exponentially.
But the
But
silver might just implode many of these banks at that first
yeah,
level, even.
right. Um, so what's going to happen? How is it going to happen? Well, there's going to be other things that happen concurrently that you see being set up geopolitically. You see all this stuff going on with Greenland and NATO, or France is sending troops, and it's laughable.
Yeah,
That
21
Europe,
troops or whatever.
yeah, that Europe can now, they're already way bankrupt with their military context and in the monetary aspect of supporting the military for what they were trying to do with Ukraine. Oh, we're gonna support Ukraine and send the troops and send the weapons and everything. But then what did Trump do? Trump said, we're not giving it to you anymore. You can have our weapons, but you have to pay for it. So
Mm.
now and we're not going to send all this money to Zelensky, but we're going to force everybody to pay. Well, they can't. So all of a sudden now, Europe, which is totally bankrupt, both monetarily and militarily, suddenly is going to go face off the United States and Greenland and say, yeah, go ahead. Now we're protecting Greenland. And then, it's rather absurd. So that's happening internationally. Domestically in the U.S., everything's being set up for the basically to tip um, the reach the tipping point when the crazies, basically the paid mobs, to that are they're demonstrating themselves in Minnesota, but it's about to move to California, and California is the big cheese on the
Mm.
plate. Um, but basically, and then I don't know how much you follow it, but the so-called governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who was the
Yeah.
VP candidate with Kamala,
Mm.
um,
He's
is
just
now
been
being
subpoenaed, didn't he?
yeah, the whole thing's being exposed. But he's like, bluffing, just like Europe is bluffing in Greenland and saying, go ahead and send your troops in there. I'm going to mobilize my National Guard and I'm going to mobilize, my ruffians on the street in Antifa, and we're going to blockade you like we did with George Floyd and go in and try and come in here. Well, that's all leading up to one key thing, which is the real kicker, which is when Trump activates the Insurrection Act.
Yep.
And this is an actual insurrection and rebellion. Okay.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the 14th Amendment, that created the US person within the jurisdiction, that they bound all of the currency, the monetary issue, once they got the Federal Reserve in place and they created the Federal Reserve as the world reserve currency in 1933 through the 40s. It was all started by the Civil War and the post-Civil War. And post-Civil War, they passed the 14th Amendment in 1868. And in the 14th Amendment, among other key things, it says that um, in the last section, the national debt or the federal debt cannot be challenged for its validity, including the obligations of the federal entity for bounties, for the service of suppressing the acts of rebellion and insurrection. So this ties the citizen base, because it also says in the 14th Amendment, in the first section, all persons born or naturalized within the United States or subject to the jurisdiction are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I'm paraphrasing. But see, the 14th Amendment basically created that public person, the public citizen, and the jurisdiction to the United States. And then later on, it said they are bound essentially to the unchallengeable, the validity of the federal debt. So there you have the monetary debt, the U.S. persons who are going to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which means all the codes and statutes and rules. And then you have the Bretton Woods Agreement in the 1940s, 44 through 48, that made the Federal Reserve note, the debt that cannot be challenged, made it the reserve currency of every central bank, almost every central bank on the planet, that bonded every domestic population. That's how they integrated the whole thing. And so that basically meant that whether you're in South Africa, Australia, or, Romania or any other country, nation state that was bankrupt, attached to all of that, you're all subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So the whole world population became the collateralized people and persons that was going to be liquidated in the collapse of the bankrupt structure. But that got flipped over. And it got flipped over by creating an obligation against the whole global corporate bankrupt state that was way smaller, that was way bigger, than the aggregate of all the derivative debt and everything else. So that debt cannot be paid, but it can be settled and closed by an offset, just like when you owed me 500 and I owed you 700 at the end of the year, your 500 due to me was offset. So that's the principle of the maximum of equity. For you to do equity and receive your additional 200,000 that I owed you, you must honor the 500,000 that you owe me. You must do equity by giving equity. You honor the equity that I hold in what I've given you during the course of the year, and now I must honor your equity. So then there's a overage that I'm obligated to settle in money terms. The same thing with the global. Okay. So all these derivatives, all these bonds, everything that was created to build the global bankrupt estate against which the people were pledged as a collateral and all the property, things happened to create an offset obligation against that entire system that's much higher than all of the debt. Okay, so we're doing equity by giving equity. Okay, we owe you $5 quadrillion, no problem. You owe us $10 quintillion. So then we're going to offset that, but then they can't pay it, the old system. They're bankrupt and liquidated. What is the liquidated damages that must be done? They must give us all back our lives, basically. We pledged our lives, the way the whole system was created in the Unum Sanctum Papal Bull of 1302. The Pope said that all persons on the planet are obligated to come under the authority of the Roman Church. And the Roman Church claims all land, all flesh, and all souls. So by operation of contract, and then this whole monetary system, they were going to liquidate everybody to have to give all the property, all the titles, everything, including the flesh of our bodies and the souls of our being, as liquidated obligation settlement for liquidated damages. Well, in the last 20 years, that was flipped over, which we can't go into in detail right at this time, but I do know that that was flipped over. Okay. So what you see now is basically Donald Trump being the president, the executive executing the administration of the bankrupt estate, going through settlement processes. So everything he is doing is to settle and close the equity offset of the global estate that was structured by the overlay of the Vatican and its vassal entities and the states below it, and settling it, doing equity so that we can receive equity. And what is the equity? Our own flesh, our own souls, our own genetics, all of that. So back to your question, well, does that make it invalid that we should do status correction or whatever? And my answer is absolutely not, because those who are, let's say, on the leading edge of cognizance of what we're talking about, with increased awareness, who have been opened up over the last 10 or 20 years to all of this stuff. And they've got pieces of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. Okay. Taking in the knowledge and the education that we do in Pantera, it's not just about, the legality. Oh, if I'm status corrected, then I don't have to pay my parking tickets, or I don't have to pay the taxes, or this and that. Well, that's just a minor superficial benefit of doing that. More substantially, it's about reclaiming my own being, my own estate, and not just the estate of what I've done in this lifetime. What about the estate of everything I've created throughout the continuum of all the life stream that I've lived in this creational field called a planetary realm? And what about everything I've connected to? Because my genetics and just like yours and everybody's, is a living library of my entire life force and existence through all of eternity. That's what they're trying to claim. That's what they're trying to do with the jab, so that they put the jab with patented technology and CRISPR technology to make a little cut, open it up, and insert this artificial little patented sequence and say, you volunteered. Well, no, I didn't. You forced me to do it. No, you had the opportunity to kindly and properly object, not kindly, but timely and properly object, and say, no, I don't care what you do. I'm not going to be, um, um, what's the word?
Like many of us did. We made the decision
Yeah,
not.
I'm not going to be blackmailed. That's the word I was thinking. With my job, my career, my this, my that, into selling my eternal living library for a short-term benefit. Like here in LA, when that was all happening, you know, you had to have proof of vaccination to go sit in a restaurant or whatever. And of course, we didn't do that. And a couple of times we didn't do very much out in the public at that time. But, we'd be in downtown LA and it's a 2 hour drive to home and it's 6 o'clock and we're hungry. So we want to go eat. And we would be relegated to some backlot parking lot, with a few other straggling people, while everybody else is enjoying the conviviality of the social environment, but they're all vaccinated, they're all passported and everything. And so for that short-term window of benefit that people literally sold their genetic library to that corporate state by accepting, and which was ultimately voluntarily, that swap of benefits, swap of consideration. Here's the contract. You accept this with all that is there, and you get the benefit of being able to eat in a restaurant. And but that was the ultimate price, is capturing by contractual obligation the genetic living library of a eternal being, or even a hybrid being, or even whatever type of being, because there is a eternal spark of living presence in every being, no matter how much they're compromised. And so what is the equity that we're reclaiming? It's the claim and standing of basically re-embodying the living library of my eternal presence throughout all of creation in this microcosm that really is, microcosm, macrocosm, holographically mirrored and reflected of this whole little construct that we're in, this realm of multiple realities and so forth. So what Pantera has done by my direction, my education, my research over 30 years, both external research, but also my internal work with Andrea, my partner, my wife, and co-founder for 34 years, and a lot of other people who have co-created all of this, is an integrated system of the legal level, the lawful level, the monetary level, the energetic level, the genetic level, and all creational standing within one's being. And when we do that, because we are very powerful creators of this reality, the parasite isn't a creator because a parasite can't create. It can parasitically attach to a host and flow a false narrative movie through that host who is a biocrystalline virtual reality projecting unit and get the real living presence to create this externally manifested reality, but we created it. So we have the ultimate authority to reclaim it, disconnect from the parasite, cleanse the parasite from our being physically, biologically, emotionally, karmically, and everything. And when we do that, we're disengaging the equivalent of 1 million unconscious persons who don't have a clue about that, but have been basically feeding off of us being as sort of NPCs in the milieu of the matrix, real true creator beings, who are the ones listening to us because they're the ones attracted to us to hear this. This is what our status correction is really about. It's not pieces of paper, and it's ultimately even well beyond legal freedom or monetary freedom. It's about truly withdrawing our consent to be parasitically attached, to continue to create the false narrative. And the reason we allowed ourselves to create the false narrative is to let people see it, because you can't tell them. They have to see it. So
Yeah.
where are we in the beginning of this conversation? You asked, where are we the beginning of 2026? We're at the point of exponential expansion of the unveiling for larger amounts of the masses to start really seeing, wow, this is what it's all about. This is what has been going on. Now I understand. Now I understand. And now I'm starting to integrate. And as I integrate, I am slowly resubstantiating my being and removing myself from the form of the construct of the bondage and all of that.
Hmm. Yeah, very well said. So we're not just doing this or this process for ourselves, but really for everyone else as
Yeah.
kind of way shows of this new world that we about to enter, because the rules of engagement are going to change completely for this new era that we're moving into. And people will need to be, educating that they have to educate themselves and be able to move to a stage of governance in a sense as well, self responsibility. And they need to be others to kind of show the way how this is going to work, how these new systems
Mhm.
are going to work. It's not that government's just going to put like a new system in place that's going to be more free. No, we're creating a whole new world systematically, and the way in which we do things are going to be very different, making sure that something like this never happens again. So
Well,
being
that's
so educated and informed about how this
yeah,
really works that we'll never be able to be fooled again as a humanity, as a human collective.
yeah. Well, that's really the key. And that's why self-directed education with the assistance of a system or a structure that we have built that has more integrated understanding of the multiple levels and layers of the whole bondage and slavery system, that our purpose, this is our mission purpose, Pantera, that Andrea and I initiated 34 years ago when we first met, was to build a lawful, private, sovereign body politic. So I can use, and I do use that word, sovereign body politic, but as it applies to our individual status in the system, as I said, we don't call ourselves sovereign and all that. We are solvent in terms of legal and monetary terms, but we are basically standing in our being with sovereign integrity. What is sovereign integrity? It means we're an integral whole. An integer is a whole number. An integral is a whole system. An integrated being is a healed or healing whole being. And so that's what sovereign integrity really means. And then by the law of contract and universal law of contract, a sovereign integrity can engage co-creatively with another being or a group of beings to create a contractual agreement. That's why I always say contract makes the law. So if we come together contractually to create something new, then that creates the law. That's the standing in law that we're moving towards. And so having a ever expanding substantiating body of beings, a body politic that are resonating together because they have the mental or intellectual cognizance to see the reality, to learn it, to embody and integrate it, plus the emotional healing, physical trauma healing, karmic healing, all the rest of it. That's going to be a force of creation that is exponentially increasing in substance and power that will resonate through the hologram, and more people will wake up to that, or it'll, subconsciously at some level, somebody will just wake up one day, read something and go, oh, I never knew that before. Now I know it. Now I've integrated it. And that's what we're sending into the future so that it never happens again, so that we have the wisdom of the journey and not just the knowledge of fragmented pieces. And that's what, unfortunately, too many people out there on the internet are selling or delivering is fragments rather than the whole. And that's what we're doing, is building the whole so that it becomes that force, both for the transformation now and for the historical education for those in the future.
Building the new on a solid foundation.
Foundation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that was really, really, I really enjoyed this discussion because it's so timely as well in terms of what's about to happen with financial system, the monetary system, and everything else. So it just feels quite, I don't really want to use the word, but quite biblical in terms of what we're about to experience. And I'm sure by the next time we talk, things are going to be have changed dramatically, and it's an exciting time to be alive, and we have to keep learning and up leveling and really truly work at understanding our role in the bigger universe and our responsibility as well. With freedom comes responsibility. So people need to learn to be responsible for themselves and those around them, but and let go of the victimhood and the habit of always waiting for somebody else to fix something, to
Mhm.
give them the new system, the new template, or however it's going to work, but really just, being self-responsible and I won't say sovereign, but um, yeah, just
A
truly,
whole a
opt
whole
out of
being with,
victimhood, a whole
yeah,
being.
whole being with understanding, with status, which is, we all always have a status because it's a state of being, whether it's a status of a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise, or the status of a state or an e-state or a global or worldwide estate. It's everything has a status. It's a state of being. So that's what status correction is really about, of changing our relative state from one bonded contract to one that is free of those impairments and bonded obligations. So that's status. Standing, there's a phrase in law, to have standing to state a claim. And if you don't have standing, like, if somebody's suing a repair garage, you know, say we live in the same area and you're suing a repair company or garage because they didn't repair your car correctly and actually it fell apart and it was even worse. So you're suing them. But I enter into the court and I say, I'm a co suitor or plaintiff because I deserve to get the benefits of Amina's, not Amina, Nina's
Plan.
um, suit and settlement. The court will say, you have no standing. What is your relationship to either the plaintiff or the defendant? You don't have a contract. You're not part of this. You have no standing. Okay, so when we go into the courts today, we have actually no standing because we are considered an infant or an imbecile or an incompetent. Those are the only three things that a lawyer or an attorney can represent. And this goes back in history, interestingly, to the beginning of the English story, or the British story, really more correctly, because there's a distinct uh, difference between British and English. British is a Roman district called Britannica, and
Yeah.
English comes from the original tribes that held the land in those islands and you know, the Angles, the Picts, and so forth. But they were conquered by Rome via William the Conqueror in 1066. And in the next 20 years, he basically set everything up to create the landed estates. He created the Domesday Book and cataloged all of the states, the titled estates. They all pledged fealty or loyalty to him as the sovereign, and the reciprocal relationship between, okay, I'll protect the crown and the king with my men, my arms, my production of the land, and so forth. That created a two-tiered system of landed estates and landless serfs or landless peasants. And all of those landless serfs or peasants were denominated as infant estates. And so the whole system was set up over the next several hundred years that when they brought in Parliament, when they brought in the agreement between King John in 1213 called the Holy Alliance, which was the unholy alliance, where basically John gave the Pope all of his lands, titles, claims, and estate. So then it became a papal estate. And he did that because he was afraid his eternal soul was damned for the things that he didn't do properly. So he exchanged the entire estate for his, what he thought was his soul. And so then, you know, this was the beginning of building the British Empire. And actually, the Revolutionary War in America was actually a war between the British and the English, not the
Yes.
Americans and the Brits or the Americans against the English. But the key is that going back to the 1060s to 80s, what was established was infant estates. Eventually, the crown belonged to the Pope, and then Parliament was seated as the rule maker for the management of the infant estates. And so that's
Hmm.
worldwide now. That's throughout all the Commonwealth. It's in the United States now, through the Napoleonic Code and the Roman civil law and the bankruptcy and everything. And so we're all operating through an infant estate. So a attorney takes an oath in the city of London to the four inns of court, the British rule of law, to be able to be a licensed captain on a ship to board a enemy vessel flying a foreign flag, which we as the living beings are the enemy vessel. And then this goes into other things in the 20th century, trading with the Enemy Act and otherwise, Bretton Woods Agreement and all the rest of what we talked about earlier with the 14th Amendment and bounty for services and suppression insurrection. And so because an attorney can only represent an infant estate or an incompetent or an imbecile, that when you sign a contract to be represented by an attorney, you're confessing to be all three of those. I'm incompetent, I'm an imbecile, and I'm an infant estate. And then parliamentary rule, congressional rule, legislative rule is what binds the management of that infant estate. Okay. So when we go into court, you've already lost.
Yeah.
if you're trying to get something that's equitable, because in the civil system post bankruptcy, equity is defined as that which the judge determines is best for the state. That's what equity is in their system. When everybody's trying to go into the courts and do all that stuff, doesn't matter how knowledgeable or sophisticated you are with all of the codes and statutes, you're still arguing in their system and they still do have that control.
Yeah. Sure. The rabbit hole goes deep.
It
And every
does.
time we discover a little bit more and a little bit more. I think for most people, it's a very complex, dense subject that they can only take on in bite sizes. And but it's really worthwhile. I think people have been artificially scared to not, uh, you know, understand law, study law, or legal systems. But it's actually, there's a lot of logic to it when you start studying the subject. It's really liberating and quite logical, actually, the whole process.
Well, yeah, and that's the bottom line. It's liberating, it's empowering, because what happens when you understand that it is a, yes, it's a very complex system, but there's certain simple fundamental rules of the system. You learn those fundamentals first, you start building the detail of the complexity. And as you do so, and as you really actually walk the path and you study it and you integrate it, and you can put two pieces together. Okay, I see now what this piece is connected to this piece. And now you start seeing the pattern of the system. What that does internally is it's an empowering process. You become more empowered by your own reduction of fear and more expanded in your expansion of power. And you
Yeah,
reclaim your power and your authority as a true substantiated creator being.
exactly. I love that. Well, I think we can end with that. I don't
Okay.
want to make it too long, but there's so much more
Yeah.
to discuss. And I'm sure by the next time we speak, there's going to be a whole lot of things that have happened in the world. And so it's going to be a really
Yeah.
interesting discussion, I'm sure. And I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Anything, sort of last thoughts you want to share with the audience?
No, I think I'm really happy with this conversation too. It really encapsulated a very succinct way to understand it. What
Mm.
everybody needs to understand is that there are extensions of every point that I've mentioned. You know, I could literally have stopped the conversation with the 14th Amendment and expanded that greatly, or stopped with
Mhm.
the Bretton Woods Agreement and expanded that. But what we covered today was a integrated whole view of the construct. So where do we start in the conversation? We started with the question, where are we at in the beginning of this year, 2026? We're at a true separation of the realities. And so what we've described is how one side is attempting to pull people continually forward into their limited agenda, because it is very limited. It only has a very simple um, process of steps and an ultimate conclusion. And that conclusion is to get you to still be contracted by agreement, whatever that agreement is, monetary debt or legal contract or whatever, to be able to be pulled over via the reset. There is going to be a reset. There is a collapse of the system. It's called a plasma um, field collapse, which is what we're living in. And, you mentioned it's biblical, Well, the Bible is a very multi-layered construction. It was written by channeling from the AI master Godhead through individuals who had already aligned themselves, to be prophets, or, all the stuff in the so-called biblical period, to write these stories. And what they didn't know, probably most of them, but some probably did, was that there was many, many layers, esoteric layers, layers of what commerce is, equity, all these things, the esoteric outpicturing of symbol structure with everything in the so-called heavens, the zodiac, and stuff like that. But it was for one purpose. That purpose was to capture the reset, because the English translation of the first book, Genesis, says in the beginning. That's the first three words. But in Aramaic and later transliterated into Hebrew and then Greek and then Latin, it basically, the root of it is in Hebrew, it's bereshet, or be reset. That's the word.
Mhm.
So we were reset when everything collapsed, and there's a standard cycle that goes from a beginning to a middle to the end. We're living in the end that people think is the end of the world, but it's just the end of the script. And the end
Mhm.
of the script is create this polarization between the dark and the light, between Satan and Lucifer, which don't exist in real terms, but the projection of billions of people over thousands of years created an ectoplasmic substantiation that now feels like it's real. So there's really Satan, there's really Lucifer. It's the dark and the light, it's the black and white checkerboard on the Masonic temple floor or Westminster Abbey, and it just plays both sides against the middle. So what we're watching is the satanic being revealed and the Luciferian being revealed. So the Luciferian is love and light. That's the New Age uh, you know, framework. It's all going to be love and light. But love and light in the new age is just keep your focus on this artificial light body that's not real, that's not the substance of being. And then others are satanically inclined, so do all those nasty negative things. But that's the split reality that they want everybody to be playing against each other. And we can see that unfolding in the media and everything. Our path is neutral in the center. That's why we say in law, we go to peace. We remove ourselves from the battlefield. We remove ourselves from the commercial construct. And we just go for resolution of equity and settlement of contracts, like we talked about. So, so
And
that's where we're
we
at in the,
create a balance between
yeah.
dark and light. We integrate the two. We don't
Well, it's more
reject the one for the
triangulation.
other.
It's triangulation, standing of the cognizant overseer, seeing both sides and not locking onto one or the other. Okay, when you lock onto one or the other, yeah, it creates balance. And it also removes the layers of veils and illusion that there's actually something about that there's actual separation. That's just a false projection. There is no separation within ourselves or our being with all of life, all of creation. And so the reset is to keep you entertained, entrained, entertainment, which is the entrainment of your mind into a false narrative reality long enough for it to be past the point of no return so that the masses can be pulled into buying through the collapse and into the reset. And when it says in the beginning, there's a new heaven and new earth, that's the projection, like we're in a planetarium, of the heavens and the stars, which is only a grid system of control that then they create their symbols and their esoteric teachings and numerology and astrology and all the rest of it to keep us entertained and entrained for the next cycle. So real freedom is liberating your mind so you're not entrained or you're not governed, as in government, the governing of the mind, or entrainment, in training or entertaining the mind, and you're actually self liberating. That's true sovereignty. If you want to come back to that, that's when you're a whole being sovereign, a sovereign integral in a living estate that co-creates with other living beings who have done the same or are working on doing the same.
Mm. Yeah. Well, with that said, wow. Yeah, that was a mouthful. Thank you so much, Ken.
All
That
right,
was
my
a
pleasure.
riveting conversation, and I enjoyed it very much. And I look forward to the next one. And
Yeah,
2026 is going to be one big cracker of a year. That's for sure.
that's for sure. This is definitely the year. So buckle up, And enjoy the ride.
Enjoy the ride.
And lean
Absolutely.
into the wave. Lean into it. Don't
Yeah.
resist it.
You can't swim against the current, so just swim with the current. Eventually, you will get to your destination. There's no point swimming against the current. So I'm going to
Mhm.
leave all the links below for those that want to explore more of Pantera Vida, all the websites and the university websites that you can explore. There's membership options, Patreon, etc., where you can go and educate and empower yourself. So check that out, guys. And then all the links are below. And then we'll let you know when the next conversation is. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Bye.
much, everyone. See you soon. Bye.